Hello, everyone. My name is Talita Pinotti, and together with Patricia Borelli, Patrícia Rinaldi, and Roberta Machado, we are Associate Professors of International Relations at FACAMP. And here with us, we have also our special guest, Professor Jan Lüdert, who is an Associate Professor at the City University of Seattle, where he serves as Director of Curriculum and Instruction. From July 2021, he will be a visiting research scholar at the City University of New York's Ralph Budge Institute for International Studies. Professor Jan earned his PhD at the Department of Political Science at the University of British Columbia, Vancouver. I would like to thank all of you for being here to launch the book Signature Pedagogies in International Relations, edited by Professor Jan Lüdert and published by the International Relations Publishing. Professors Patricia Borelli, Patrícia Rinaldi, Roberta, and I had the pleasure of contributing with the chapter Teaching and Learning International Relations Professional Skills Through Simulations. And we are here today to discuss some of the aspects of this book. So, Jan, I would like to start our conversation by clarifying the concept of signature pedagogies as designed by Schumann. Could you give us a brief explanation?
Thank you so much, Talita, and everyone else. First and foremost, let me thank all of you for putting on this event today to celebrate the launching of this edited volume with a number of scholars from around the world in different educational settings. And I think your work in particular, together with the other authors, really highlight the value of thinking about how we teach and impart knowledge to our international relations students. And to answer your question, the framework of signature pedagogies is a framework that was first developed by Professor Schulman from Stanford University. And he was particularly interested in looking how particular disciplines teach new novices to become experts. And in fact, he had not focused at all on the social sciences or the humanities, but was more interested in professions like lawyers and doctors who go through a very professional and practical training. His ideas and conceptual framework, however, became very interesting to me initially at the University of British Columbia, where I also worked for the Center for Teaching and Learning and Technology. And I thought about the ways in which we could apply the conceptual framework to our own discipline in international relations. And the signature pedagogy framework really is a framework that makes us think more deeply about the socializations that we receive as educators and how that socialization then shows up in praxis as we're working with our students. And there are really three sort of components to understanding a signature pedagogy. On the one hand, they are of course pervasive and habitual across the discipline. So regardless of whether you're getting an IR degree in Brazil or in the UK, there will be a certain set of sort of conceptual groundings and anchors that are similar across institutions and regardless of instructor. And following from that are really what Schulman referred to as the surface structure, the implicit structure, and the deep structure. When we think about teaching and learning, we often think about the surface structure. That is, are we using a lecture style? Are we using some sort of a didactic method to impart knowledge? So the surface structure is really, as the name implies, what meets the eye. That is the practical ways of instruction. It then starts getting a little bit trickier as we're thinking about the deep structure and the implicit structure. The deep structure refers to the ways in which teaching and learning is thought to be done in a way that is most effective or most relevant to a particular career. And it often involves a particular set of assumptions of what works. And so, as we're thinking, for instance, in medicine, what is done there in the deep structure is the idea of taking a round. So when you become a doctor, you're attached to a professor in the hospital, and you start taking rounds, and that's the way that you learn somehow to become and embody being a doctor. The deep structure in IR equally, I think, tries to impart this sort of notion about being a knower of the discipline, using concepts in a certain way, arguing and creating an argument in a particular manner, whether it's verbally or written. And then we have finally the implicit structure. And the implicit structure is the normative and ethical bedrock to our teaching and learning. What are the key normative and ethical assumptions that are part of our teaching the discipline? And I think in some sense, when we think about international relations, some of that implicit structure is actually in the name of our discipline. We're referring to international, so our state centrism is actually quite clear in this deep structure. And I think, as many authors in the book highlight, that deep structure is being questioned by all of us who are interested not just in states and the interactions of states, but in all sorts of other interesting actors. And so in combination, these three structures, and for us being able to articulate what they mean in our teaching and learning, give us a better sense of our teaching praxis. And that was in many ways the intention of the book.
So let's start with some other thoughts about this very interesting subject. So one of the reasons why we wanted to write a chapter for the book was to learn more about our own discipline. The four of us graduated in international relations, and we became international relations professors. So we asked ourselves, why international relations needs a signature pedagogy? We find Professor Schulman's argument really insightful. He explained that in order to understand a profession, we need to study its form of professional preparation. In other words, we need to understand how students of a specific profession are trained and taught. By doing that, we can find the characteristics of teaching and learning of a profession. In international relations, we learn in an unconscious way. And as professors, we teach our students based on how we were taught. I would like to bring the example of international relations in Brazil to illustrate that point. Here, international relations as a discipline does not have an identity or a signature pedagogy. There is a notion that international relations students learn a variety of subjects, such as political science, economics, history, and languages. It seems that we know a little about everything, but we cannot figure out our professional identity. I would like to hear your thoughts about those issues. So I would like to ask you, what were your motivations to organize and edit this book? Was this impression we have of international relations in Brazil also on your minds?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think those are a set of excellent questions to ponder over, and also give us a good inroad into considering how this edited volume really came about. To start with, as I had mentioned, the reason why I became interested in signature pedagogies in international relations was because after doing some research in the Faculty of Arts at the University of British Columbia on citizenship skills of undergraduate education, as well as training faculty in the arts on signature pedagogies more generally, where I actually trained faculty from all the arts and social sciences, not just international relations. We have this saying in Germany that the shoemaker has the worst shoes, implying that oftentimes when we teach something or impart some knowledge, we ourselves haven't really done the homework. And it occurred to me that we don't have any signature pedagogies in international relations compendium, edited volume, a way on reflecting on the state of signature pedagogies in our discipline. And so the idea really came about to begin collecting a set of contributions from scholars from around the world on what their signature pedagogy would look like, and also really encouraging a wide variety of institutional settings. In many ways, I think the motivation of the book was to begin building as a signature pedagogies in international relations, which I think our volume has shown that is perhaps neither desirable nor possible, but rather that there is value in plurality and pluralism, and that really we have many signature pedagogies that are related to our own voices and agency. And in relation to the question of whether or not IR in Brazil also came to mind, I wouldn't necessarily say Brazil, but I think one of my intentions from the outset was to really think hard about not creating another book by North American scholars about international relations. I certainly took it to heart that we needed to bring in the voices from scholars from all around the world, from the global North and the global South, from developing and developed countries, from small liberal arts institutions to high-powered research institutions, and to really bring all of those institutional and pedagogical settings into conversation. And in many ways, I think we've been really blessed in securing some 14 chapters from scholars, not just from Brazil, but from Hungary, from the UK, from the United States, Canada. And I think the combination out of all of those really brings forward this idea that there is a lot of value for us to think about signature pedagogies as a connective tissue, that we can begin a broader conversation about how we teach and best impart knowledge to the next cadre of international relations scholars, as well as practitioners. And I think the notion of teaching practitioners was really critical for me in this book, because I always realized that many of our students do not become the next professor of IR, but rather they will go out into the field, whether it's in the United Nations or in working for a small non-governmental organization. So for us to be able to articulate to our students what our approach to teaching is, I thought was really critical, because it will help us to prepare our students for their careers and their futures.
Thank you, Jan. That was very interesting. When we think more thoroughly about teaching and learning international relations, we realize it's not an easy task at all. It involves theory, practice, and other methodologies that can help international relations students to find their professional paths. So on that note, I now give the floor to Professor Patrícia Rinaldi to present her remarks about this topic.
Thank you, Roberta. Thank you, Jan, for sharing your thoughts on this book with us tonight. I would like to discuss a little bit with you this matter of international relations as a profession. Usually our students say, okay, I have an international relations degree, but what is my job? What is my profession? So in our chapter, actually, that was our starting point. We wanted to discuss how an education in international relations must entail not only theoretical, but also a practical or professional dimension. Because we understand that international relations is a discipline that doesn't have a traditional profession or is not associated with one specific job or career. And we know this is the strength of our field, right? This is something that makes international relations really beautiful. A student that graduates in international relations can work in different careers and can perform different jobs. They can be not only diplomats, they can have jobs in corporations, They can be international civil servants in NGOs or in international organizations. They can work in academia. So there are many professional possibilities. New careers and new jobs are being created for international relations professionals every day. And yet our students feel very insecure about what they can do after graduation. What will be their jobs? What will be their professions? So I think that is also our responsibility as international relations professors to address this professional issue in our classes and in the way we impart international relations knowledge. And for us, this professional dimension requires going beyond classes and lectures and allow our students to have opportunities to practice skills that could be useful in different professional settings. With all that being said, my question to you, Jan, is how can we incorporate this professional perspective in international relations teaching and learning, considering the structures of the signature pedagogy that you have already presented? How the different authors of our book address the need to give our students a better set of skills in terms of professional work and professional experience.
Mm-hmm. Again, what an important question to raise about not only our professional responsibility to be keepers of knowledge of IR, but also our responsibility and accountability that we have towards our students. And in fact, one of the sort of interesting aspects to your notion that students are being nervous about what is it that I can do, it's not necessarily unique to an IR degree. In fact, we know from research that students who are, especially those who are in an undergraduate education, they are often relying on us as mentors and supervisors to talk to them about, and they will actually reach out to us about what it is that their career options are. So it is actually a call for action, because we know from experience that our students come to our office hours and halfway into the semester will ask us, well, we just learned about Thucydides and Kenneth Waltz's realism. Now, what am I supposed to do with this, and how is this going to relate to my job going after I graduate? So really this question about what is it about the professional dimension of IR is a responsibility that we all carry as educators. And in addition to that, I think it's also important to realize that international relations, like many other social sciences, have a clear history within the liberal arts education. And as one of our authors, Lisa McLeod, makes clear, this history within the liberal arts foundation of IR also forces us to think about what we may call the citizenship skill piece of education. That is, we don't simply educate students in a field or a discipline, but we also nurture in them an understanding about the world, how they can be part and an active participant in this world, whether it's as a citizen or a local representative of their community or of their identity, and to really bring into their awareness their abilities to shape the future. And I think that combination about, on the one hand, we want to make sure that the degree that a student receives is valuable and can be transferable to various careers, as you have outlined, but also thinking about, and that relates to that deep structure of signature pedagogies and the implicit structure, what are some of the ethical and normative dimensions about knowing about the world? And so when we're thinking about the various sort of professional outcomes of a student, once we have articulated our signature pedagogy, I believe that it actually helps us to respond to our students when they come to office hours and say, Professor Talita, I'm not quite sure what I should do when I'm done with my degree, because you can then actually articulate that when you're teaching the United Nations as a model simulation or as a negotiation, that your intention is not simply to show how negotiations happens and what the outcomes are and how a treaty is formed and how compliance works and how norms are contested, but it shows them that the skills used in the negotiation in class is something that they can take away as a practical way of utilizing that in various careers, because negotiation, communication, presentation, these are all aspects to working with others. And the same is true, which I think is one aspect which I believe really comes out of the book, is the importance of perspective taking. And that is to help our students realize that by looking at a phenomenon or a case study from various perspectives, as a state negotiator, as the Secretary General of the United Nations, as a representative of an NGO, by looking at a problem from these various viewpoints, they are ultimately gaining a much richer understanding of the political world. And by doing that, I believe that we all in the book in many ways highlight ways in which students can become active and positive agents of change. And those types of practical skills give our students the confidence, but also the practical ways of stepping into a professional career without necessarily knowing what that career is, but how the skills that they have gained together with the knowledge and the concepts can help them flourish and in many ways build on their degrees that they have received.
Thank you, Jan. Your comments were actually very insightful. I think they are also, you gave very good advice to our students that feel insecure, that we're living now in a world that first, it's really important to know your perspective and to know the ability you have to change your community, to change the things around you. And I agree with you, that's something that we all impart that belief when we teach international relations. But also I think your comment's really relevant because it highlights how we need to go beyond, again, traditional lecture style and really incorporate active learning practices in which our students can be more aware of the abilities they have developed during their graduation, the skills they have, and also grow in terms of getting to know more their personalities, their willings, their ambitions, and to channel that in the career they want to build in the future. So on that note, I believe that in our experience at FACAMP, the use of simulations to foster that environment of active learning has been very helpful, and with good cases and with lots of successes to share. So now I'd like to give the floor to my dear colleague, Patricia Borelli, so she can introduce more this discussion about simulations that we specifically addressed in our chapter. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Jan. Reading the call for chapters, we became very thoughtful about these two issues, the lack of a specific path for IR professionals to follow, and then how we as professors can design a signature pedagogy for our field. And that is why we decided to contribute to the book describing our experience with our project FAMU, the FACAMP Model United Nations. We wrote about FAMU to highlight two main points. First, that simulations can not only develop professional skills, simulations can be a professional experience per se.
And for that, our second point is that the rules of procedure matter. And that is why we are affiliated also to IMUN, the UFUNA International Model UN, because many model UN don't follow the UN rules, and we believe this is a mistake, because beyond the challenge of dealing with complex issues, the UN works with a decision-making process that is based on consensus and negotiation. And as you mentioned, that makes a difference when teaching international relations. So every year, we select a group of students to organize the conference we hold here at FACAMP in early September. From January to September, we offer a discipline to teach and practice with them the very rules of procedures of the United Nations. So even though these students decide not to work at the UN, they learn how to organize a conference, they learn about international politics, they practice negotiation skills, they become more confident, and most of all, they understand the importance of consensus and how to respect different perspectives when making important decisions. And that is why we believe that in FAMUN, they learn how to think, act, and perform as responsible professionals. So considering all this, we would like to hear from you. What are your impressions about simulations as part of a signature pedagogy for the IR field? And we are also curious to know if somehow our project brought something new for you about using simulations as a pedagogical tool.
Thank you so much. And in general, I think as the readership of the book will realize, we really have a broad range of contributions, some of which really focus in on simulations specifically. And I think there's an interesting sort of set of choices that can be made. And I think the choice that you have made in your contribution in terms of developing the Model United Nations alongside the actual negotiation strategies within the UN are extremely valuable because it allows students to see that, that instead of having some sort of a basic understanding that may in fact reiterate or cement certain assumptions about that the United Nations is ineffective or that only big power players matter, but rather helps them understand that the institutional design of the United Nations has created a particular set of possibilities of deliberation, of contestation, and outcome. And that in and of itself, I think to your point, will allow them to not only realize what happens at the UN and when they go on and in 5 years from now, there's a big summit and they realize the outcome document, but rather that to build consensus across difference requires a set of skills that is not simply based in power or that is not simply based in material resources, but rather in the power of persuasion, in the way that certain venues are organized and that the rules and procedures themselves create a structural logic and critical pathways for change that in and of themselves create in students a much deeper and nuanced understanding that is applicable in many instances. And I'm sure that in your student evaluation, students will have likely commented on how having done the simulation in the UN maybe made it easier to negotiate with their friends and family or in a job interview, because it really, I think, brings forward a set of very practical skills, but also, I think, to your point, to act and perform and think like a professional. And I think that combination, I think, certainly has had, for me, many ideas come to mind of how I can adjust that in my own teaching, following on from your chapter and those of others. And at the same time, I think we clearly see a shift in international relations towards the use of simulations towards the use of case studies, precisely for the points that you have established in your claims about not simply wanting to provide some sort of conceptual understanding of what an IGO is and how it functions and why it is important, but also to provide students with an ability to become, may I say, active readers of what the United Nations and other IGOs really do and affect in the world. And that in turn can filter into many practical ways for them to become professionals. Whether it is as in the private sector, when they have to also engage with policymakers, or whether it is when they enter an NGO or any other type of career within international relations. So I really think that the pedagogical tool itself has perhaps become one central aspect of an IR signature pedagogy, because clearly we see it across institutions in different settings, and your unique approach, I think, to highlight the rules and procedures as being foundational to an understanding of the UN, in and of themselves, I think will take many readers in that direction. They will try to embody that, and perhaps the model United Nations will take to heart a need to be much more closer to reality rather than mocking up a sort of a simplified version of how the United Nations works.
Thank you, Jan. We appreciate your comments. And even we started to incorporate consensus and negotiation strategies in our daily lives. When we have to make important decisions about this project, we also remember what we taught the students and use it in our daily lives. We would like to highlight that you are already invited to come and participate with your students one day when possible, soon, I hope. And we are also excited to try other signature pedagogies explained in the book. But we truly believe simulations can be a great tool for teaching IR. Of course, it requires a lot of dedication and a lot of learning by doing. However, it is a way for us as professors to deal with these vast possibilities of paths students can follow in our field. So now I give the floor to my colleague Talita to discuss with you these challenges in teaching IR and if they are the same between North and South. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Actually, Jan, I think you mentioned earlier, right, about your preoccupation in bringing other authors to write chapters and to have their perspectives on the book. And for me, this is actually one of the main contributions of this book, right? The great diversity of acts of teaching that we get to know because the different chapters were written by people from completely different perspectives and backgrounds. And I think that the book also calls us to reflect on the values and beliefs about professional attitudes that we foster when we choose one approach instead of the other. And I find this to be especially relevant when we consider ER teaching in the Global South. Mm-hmm. And it is because for many of our students, that essential aspect that you mentioned earlier too about embodying a professional is actually sometimes hard because most of traditional career paths in international relations, such as international organizations as the UN or even NGOs as the Red Cross, they can be, actually they can seem out of reach for them, right? Just because most of headquarters, they are not located here in Brazil. We have small offices, not enough vacancies for everyone. So this may seem challenging for our students. And most of them will only have the chance to actually inhabit these environments if they choose to go abroad at some point, which is usually when they decide to pursue graduate studies. But at that time, they already lag far behind international students, unfortunately, in terms of previous experiences. And I know that for us here, as professors from the Global South, we always try to offer learning activities that recreate or simulate this international reality in your classroom. And as you mentioned, so that our students, they can actually think and act as diplomats or public civil servants. So this is, for us, it's really important. It really is a key aspect of our teaching. And with this in mind, I would like to know your perspective on that, because I know you come from a different background, you have different experiences. Do you believe that we can actually conceive a ER signature pedagogy, which can embed the contrast in teaching realities of the North and Global South? I mean, can we conceive a pedagogy which it fits the US reality and at the same time our reality in Brazil, for example?
You know, let me just start by mentioning the reason why I came into international relations. And I think maybe that will actually be an interesting way for us to realize some of those, I think, tensions that exist in the discipline between Global North and Global South. I was always politically interested. I was born in East Germany when it was still a communist country. And in fact, when the wall came down in my school, I was what was then called the political agitator, which was a role that was played by the student body to consider political questions, of course, within a sort of socialist communist understanding. I was 13 at the time, so I had some awareness of the world around me. I wasn't quite a child anymore, but clearly I also wasn't a grown-up. And I remember very vividly the change from a communist system into a unified Germany. And in many ways that have shaped me and my interest in politics more general. And then when it came time for me after high school, of which one part I actually had spent for a year in the United States, only a few years after the wall had come down, and being in America and living in Montana and sort of flyover America. And then I started studying politics and economy at Hamburg University, so in West Germany. So I encountered yet another sort of educational setup, which then took me to study abroad in Tanzania and Dar es Salaam. And I think that experience, together with my work in international development in Botswana later on, where I worked on HIV/AIDS and community programs and the empowerment of young women through various development projects. In Tanzania, I had a very unique experience because after I had arrived, the university was shut down by the government because students had protested for their per diem, for their scholarship support from the government. And the government, instead of granting the money, shut down the entire university violently with the military. Together with the fact that a very small percentage of all high school graduates in Tanzania, one of the poorest countries on the planet, actually get the chance to go to university. I started realizing that when it comes to education, all of us have a very different set of circumstances, contexts, privileges. And that sort of always stuck with me. And when I then did my PhD in the University of British Columbia, we again had a huge contrast in students. Students who come from very affluent backgrounds, where parents have all gone, both parents have a university degree, often advanced university degrees. But then we also have students who are the first time graduates in their entire family. And so that tension between privilege and underprivilege, between heritage, where you come from, I think is something we experience everywhere. And nowhere else is this, I think, as evidence to your point when we look at Global North and Global South IR. because depending on where you get your degree, as you said, you're much more likely to gain attraction at the United Nations if you have a degree from an Ivy League school from North America. Indeed, I think there has been research out that the people who go to the World Bank either got their degree at Harvard or at Columbia, and so that's where you come from when you want to go and teach, when you want to go in those organizations. And I think that really is a challenge to us. How can we still bring into the classroom a type of logic and a type of understanding about the world of politics that may or may not translate into a particular career, but that helps our students to become active participant in international politics. And we need to relate to our students even after graduation. How did this work? How did this practical set of skills that you have learned help you in whatever career you chose in the end? And so that's why I think maybe, and this is a follow-up research we can think about, is to actually look at our alumni and look at how the particular way of us teaching the discipline has shaped their career choices. And in order to sort of bridge that question you have about Global South and Global North, I think the most important thing about our discipline is to open up the conversation between scholars from each region and across institutions. And that is something that we have done in this book. That is something that I, as a scholar, do in most of my projects. We need the diversity, whether it's gender diversity, whether it's identity diversity, whether it's institutional diversity. The voices of the discipline need to be brought forward. And only in this way can we begin to embed a much more holistic signature pedagogy in IR, and indeed a discipline in and of itself. The contributions by scholars from Brazil are simply as important to IR as those from North America. And that is a challenge because the publishing world, because of institutional settings, they all have a sort of a structural problem with really allowing that space for these contributions from around the world to come forward. So that's perhaps a big challenge we still have in front of us.
Yes, you're, genius here. I think this is definitely a problem. We have some rigid structures, right, which undermine our capacity of actually exchanging ideas and exchanging our experiences. And this is so fruitful for our teachings and for actually growing ER as a whole, right? Mm-hmm. I would like to actually ask to you a question that we received on chat, and that connects with your previous affirmation that it's important for us to teach skills that will not only work for our students in their professional careers, but actually to make them active change makers in their communities. And we received a question here that actually asked that, do you think that, for example, simulations can be used also in high schools to foster this kind of active engagement in our societies?
Absolutely. I think in general, I think whether it's a simulation or not, I think it is never too early to help a young mind to understand actively how they can shape their own futures and those around them. And if we look back in the history of education, for centuries, education was passive. Knowledge holders, invoking Max Weber's notion of Herrschaftssprache, or the language of the powerful, was used to really create bottlenecks and create a very limited access to knowledge. And I think it's through active learning that we all can realize our potential as change makers, as positive agents in the world. And so simulations and any other type of active learning strategy, I believe, is well placed within all ages, whether it's in high school or even in kindergarten. You know, I think this idea of play and using play as a way to learn has somehow gotten lost in the university that likes to purport it being very serious and academic and scholastic. And we should not lose that. And I think that's equally important. Active learning is not a strategy that can supplant conceptual, deeper learning that is required to master active learning, but rather to think of those in tandem and in a natural balance that brings out those skills in our students. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. I think we definitely have some food for thought here, right? And as we approach the end of this conversation, we had one other question about an issue that, I mean, today is impossible to have a conversation and actually not mention the pandemic we are living in right now. And I think this is actually extremely important to this discussion, right? Of reinventing teaching and trying to reinvent the experiences that we offer to our students. Because worldwide, COVID has dramatically changed the way we teach, the way we interact with each other, and even the spaces we call classrooms. This Zoom space is actually our classroom right now. And it has completely redesigned higher education. Here in Brazil, for example, most universities, as FACAMP, they are still working remotely, which poses great challenges for teaching. And I think that especially for our course, for international relations, which really depends of this multicultural environment and of the international experiences that our ER students may have during their undergraduate studies, I would say that we were one of the most affected courses by this limited circulation imposed by the pandemic, which even though some places in the world are already leaving this behind, I believe that it will we'll have to live with this for a year or so, right? So for you, how do you think COVID will influence your teaching? I mean, especially considering this idea that you built on the book of having a signature pedagogy. Do you think we have to maybe add an extra chapter about ER and COVID?
First of all, I think we all must acknowledge that COVID has not only been difficult on our students, it has also been a major challenge for us as educators. It has required for all of us to react in a way that we weren't prepared, that our institutions oftentimes weren't prepared in terms of the technological support that was necessary to provide online education or other forms of hybrid education. And so I think there was this shock to the system. It has had several ramifications. On the one hand, I think we already see that many students are thinking twice about going to university at all. The value of education itself is being questioned. But also the how can I learn is being questioned. And in many ways, I think COVID has first and foremost accelerated a move towards digital learning. And now we sort of have a decision to make, I believe. On the one hand, we can decry the fact that we are losing the classroom, or we can think about ways in which live teaching in the classroom, where students actually engage with each other, in combination with online learning, where students have the opportunity to watch material up front, to have learning material available on an online platform, to be able to build wikis, to use digital technologies to again prepare them for the future. I think it's on us to create that connection and to use technology to our to our and our students' benefit, and without becoming a slave, if you will, to technology or using technology as a crutch. I'm sure many of you know the dictum that don't let the PowerPoint presentation present, you are the presenter. And I think the same is true for online education and digitization and learning. And I am somewhat worried that perhaps there will be a push towards online education in favor of in-class education. I think that would be a mistake for universities across the world. That said, I strongly believe that there is a space for using COVID as a means to modernize our teaching approaches. And perhaps what we will need is some time of taking stock and evaluating how this past year, and depending on how much longer we will have to work in a sort of remote fashion, how we can draw lessons from that can be applied going forward without, I think, undermining the overall quality of face-to-face instruction. And I think that will be with us for years to come, and to figure that out and make that a positive transition.
Yes, this is really interesting, because I think most of the time we get we miss the in-class and our personal exchange with students, but I don't think we can leave behind some of the advancements that we had. For example, this launch here, I mean, we overcame geographical barriers, right, to be here, and our students have the unique opportunities to get in touch with international scholars, to have access to other courses worldwide. So I think these are great advancements, right? I think COVID actually has some benefits considering education, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's up to us really how we translate those benefits. Rather than to run away from having been forced to some extent to try something new, and surely to have been frustrated and overworked, and having to take a class from a live modality to an online modality in of itself was a major challenge for many of us, and many long nights had to be spent to figure out the Zoom call and whatever learning management system we're using. So perhaps there's also this need for us to step away and relax a little bit, and hopefully COVID will also, and I don't want to say this lightly, COVID has disrupted our lives. It's a pandemic that we have not seen in over a century, since the turn of the 20th century. And it is a serious matter, both for us as a discipline, but also for us as educators. And so more will happen, I'm sure.
Yes, of course. I think we are experiencing once in a lifetime historic episode here, right? Which completely changed our lives, but also took us out from our comfort zone. So as you mentioned, in some fields, it's up to you to make something positive out of this change. So thank you very much, Ian. I think we raised some interesting ideas here to reflect on how we teach and also how we learn international relations. I think I saw many of our students leaving their comments and thoughts here on chat, and I do think that they will also reflect on their learning experience. So thank you very much. And for those who are watching this live, if you are interested in reading this book, the ebook can be downloaded for free at International Relations website, e-er.info. All books published by ER by International Relations Publishing. They are open access as an effort to democratize the access to high quality information related to international relations. And finally, I would like to thank my colleagues from FACAMP for this fruitful discussion and insights, and also for the great collective work of using our experience here to write one of the chapters of this book. So thank you very much, Patricia, Roberta. It's always a pleasure to have you here. And I also like to thank Professor Jan Lüdert for accepting our invitation. It was great to hear your motivation for the book and your perspective on teacher international relations. We believe that these exchanges, they are extremely valuable to our field and to improving the learning experiences we offer to our students worldwide. So thank you very much. Do you have any closing remarks?
Well, let me say once more, thank you so much for putting on this great event. Thank you to you as contributors to the volume and everybody else who's contributed. I encourage everyone to take a look at the book. And to all of our educators out there, whether they're in international relations or not, I want to thank you for helping the next generation of learners to take on what we leave behind. And to all students out there who are learning international relations, or for that matter, any other discipline, always remember your teachers were once like you. They didn't always know everything and didn't seem to be the all-knowing people, but rather understand us as facilitators of learning, and that we feel privileged to be working with you as students. And we learn as much from you as you learn from us. And I think it is in that engagement between us as fellow travelers on this world that we make it a better place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. Thank you for everyone who watched this live. Good evening.
Goodbye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.